Is Emma even coming? Carter said, halfway through a bite of steak tartare, waving his fork like he was conducting an orchestra made of ego. I was standing 5 feet away, forgotten by the seating chart but not by the waitress, who handed me the itemized bill for the compliance dinner I had personally arranged. She just handles the paperwork, he chuckled to the investors, like I was some dusty printer that occasionally jammed but mostly stayed out of the way. The table laughed. Not all of them, but enough. And just like that, my 9 years at Tevernix got reduced to a punchline between Wagyu sliders and venture capital margaritas. I didn't say a damn word. I smiled, poured myself a glass of water, and watched him fumble through half-remembered acronyms like encryption protocol and 0 day as if they were props in a high school improv scene. The investors nodded, polite but tight-lipped. Their silence was louder than he noticed. That was Carter's superpower. He mistook disinterest for approval and warnings for applause. So yeah, that's how it started. Not with a slap or a scream or even a demotion, but a sentence. She just handles the paperwork. You hear that enough times, it stops sounding like an insult and starts sounding like a challenge. By the way, if you're enjoying this story or it reminds you of a certain smug manager in your own life, take a second to hit that subscribe button and throw us a like. Seriously, it helps more than you think, and we've got a whole team fueled entirely by caffeine, petty revenge, and validation. Anyway, back to Carter. He'd only been in charge 3 months when the CEO, his dad, decided to take a step back. That's rich, considering his idea of stepping back involved daily Slack messages asking why the new fridge filter hadn't arrived. But he handed Carter the keys to the kingdom, and the frat boy prince wasted no time turning our mid-size compliance-forward software company into his own personal startup playground. First came the branded hoodies, then the kombucha fridge, then the silent replacement of our project tracking system with a Notion board titled the Hustle Hub. I wish I were joking. Suddenly, our VP of InfoSec was reporting to a guy named Blake, whose biggest credential was a podcast called Disrupting Disruption. Our marketing lead was replaced by Carter's old roommate from Chilane, whose LinkedIn profile just said vision. Grit. Swag. Meanwhile, I kept things from catching fire. I finalized the MSA amendments for the Redstone deal. I filed the annual data flow transparency updates with our external counsel. I redlined the access logs protocol for the new offshore team. I submitted our quarterly security incident report, a clean zero, by the way, thanks to the process I'd built, and every single file, time-stamped, archived, backed up to a private folder on a server Carter didn't even know existed, was the only insurance policy I trusted. Still, the air changed. I noticed my invite to the Q2 GTM sync vanished. Suddenly I was being CC'd instead of addressed directly. When I asked about the new investor memo that mentioned an AI-enhanced compliance dashboard, Carter blinked and said, "Oh, I thought you were on formatting now." Formatting. That's when the gut feeling started. The slow, sticky sense that I was being pushed, no, edged out. Not with a layoff or a write-up, but with silence. With omission. Like a glitch in the code no one wanted to patch. One Thursday, I found myself alone in the compliance war room, storage closet, with a lukewarm coffee and a sticky note that said PLZ review vendor flows, in Carter's chicken scratch. The post-it was attached to a printout of a diagram I had built. The arrows were in the wrong direction. The terms were misspelled. The source data had been stripped of context and turned into a glossy, color-coded hallucination. It wasn't just inaccurate, it was dangerous. If anyone outside the company ever saw this and assumed it reflected our real protocol, we'd be toast. I didn't fix it, not then. I opened a new document, named it Carter Deck Edits Redacted, uploaded the original, uploaded his improved version, noted the time, noted the change, and then I filed it in my archive with a small smile. Not because I had a plan, not yet, but because I'd seen this movie before. Carter thought he was the director, but I was the one running the projector, and I was just getting started. The next wave hit on a Monday, of course it did. That's when Carter strutted in with a guy named Trent who looked like he moisturized with Bitcoin. Tan loafers, black turtleneck, and a clipboard full of buzzwords. "He's our new capital raise consultant," Carter announced, like we'd all been dreaming of someone to teach us how to add synergy to a pitch deck. Trent didn't even pretend to care what anyone did. He just pointed to departments and said things like, "We'll sunset this or let's move that under marketing." Apparently, legal, security, and compliance were back-end noise. My team and I, reclassified as operational support. That's like calling a seatbelt decorative. One of my analysts, Priya, asked Carter if this meant we'd still be involved in MSA oversight. He gave a lopsided grin and said, "Don't worry, it's all covered. We've got SOC2 basically wrapped." I felt that in my spine. SOC2 isn't a certificate you laminate and hang in the kitchen like Employee of the Month. It's an ongoing, invasive process, an audit that lives and breathes inside your systems. You don't wrap it, you bleed for it. And Carter had done exactly none of that bleeding. I had, twice, Type I and Type Roman 2. I had coordinated every control, every documentation packet, every user access at a station, and every remediation cycle. And now this Muppet in an overpriced Henley was telling investors it was done and dusted. I said nothing. That's the part that kills me in hindsight. I didn't argue. I didn't storm out. I just nodded like a well-trained ghost, a relic. It wasn't fear, it was strategy. Because if Carter was going to fabricate a compliance protocol out of vape smoke and LinkedIn slides, I was going to make damn sure I wasn't holding the brush when he painted the lie. Later that day, I got an email from legal asking me to confirm receipt of MSA sign-off delegation. It was a formality, but it confirmed what I already suspected. Carter had officially removed me from the chain of authority. He replaced my signature line with a dotted line box labeled Executive Review, which in Carterese meant himself or worse, Trent. My palms didn't sweat. My voice didn't crack. I just printed the email, circled the line with a red pen, and filed it in the same archive folder as Carter's fake flowchart. Then I opened a new browser tab, typed slowly. Federal Auditor Certification, SOC2 Specialization, Expedited Pathway. Application portal blinked to life like a dare. It wasn't revenge. Not yet, it was armor. See, in our industry, being a certified federal auditor with SOC2 credentials is like being a nuclear technician in a room full of kids playing with matches. It doesn't just give you knowledge, it gives you legal teeth. If you see something fraudulent, you're required to report it. And if you don't, you're on the hook. So I filled out the forms, uploaded every credential I had, every audit I'd led, every data control policy I'd authored from scratch while Carter was still trying to remember the Wi-Fi password. I hit submit, paid the fee out of my own pocket, and then I waited. 2 days later, during a company culture offsite at some boutique brewery, Carter grabbed the mic during trivia night and shouted, "Big news coming next week. $300 million big." Everyone cheered. I sipped my ginger ale and stared at the label. Back in the office, the pitch deck started circulating. Trent sent it out like gospel. I opened the PDF and skimmed it with my jaw clenched. There it was, slide 14, SOC2 certified bulletproof controls. Underneath, a diagram Carter had clearly Frankensteined from 2 different systems we hadn't used in over a year. This wasn't just sleazy. It was dangerous. The kind of thing that could trigger legal repercussions if investors ever felt misled. So I flagged the file. Saved it with a new name, Tevernix Investor Pitch Fraud Risk Draft 1, PDF, filed it in a locked folder, and waited for my license to arrive. It's funny, people think silence means powerlessness, that sitting still is surrender. But I've learned something in compliance. The quietest rooms are the ones where things are being recorded. You ever stare at a screen so long the cursor starts blinking in Morse code, like it's trying to warn you? That was me, 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, cross-referencing ISO control frameworks with SOC2 obligations, while a microwave burrito slowly collapsed next to my elbow. My cat, Reggie, had long since abandoned me for warmer furniture, and the only sound in my apartment was the buzz of my second monitor's fan. Tired little engine pushing through because it had no choice. That made 2 of us. The federal auditor coursework wasn't flashy. No TED talk summaries or leadership jargon, just dry, brutal modules on data integrity, system monitoring, and breach responsibility. The kind of stuff Carter called nerd glue in passing. I took notes like I was studying for war, because I was. Every clause I memorized was another arrow in my quiver for when the time came, and I had no doubt it would. Meanwhile, back at the funhouse, Carter announced a brand refresh. And because nothing says trustworthy like a bunch of half-lit LinkedIn headshots, he scheduled a photo shoot for the compliance and risk team. I found out about it when Priya texted me a behind-the-scenes selfie with the caption, "Where are you?" They said you had a schedule conflict? I didn't reply. I just stared at the photo. There was my team, standing in front of a whiteboard I'd designed, holding clipboards filled with protocols I'd written, and grinning like this was a class picture. And in the middle, Carter, arms folded like he was the architect of a cathedral he didn't even know how to spell. I could see it in their faces, they were uncomfortable, but they were also scared. I couldn't blame them. When the tide shifts, you cling to whatever dry land you can. Later that day, Carter sent out a company-wide email with the subject line, Operational Clarity Update, New Focus Areas. Let me read you the best part. Going forward, Emma will be focusing on documentation formatting and archival alignment to support our new information velocity goals. Please route all strategic compliance queries to Blake or myself. Archival alignment. Information velocity. I read the sentence 3 times, like it might unsay itself if I looked hard enough. Then I laughed, loud, full-body laughed until I coughed. It was that kind of laugh, the one that holds back a scream by the throat. I forwarded the email to my personal account, saved the raw HTML version, dragged it into a folder titled Public Revisionism Carter Edition. Timestamped as always. I didn't reply, didn't push back, didn't even blink. Instead, I opened a terminal window, typed a script. What it did was simple. It logged into our internal compliance Slack channel using a service account I had admin rights to still somehow and set up a secure auto backup. Every thread, every file, every private DM mentioning the word audit, SOC, investor, or Emma. The files were encrypted and dumped hourly into a cloud vault no one else had access to. Not legal, not IT, not even God himself if he forgot the password. I didn't do it out of paranoia. I did it because I'd seen what came next. Carter was on a timeline. The pitch meetings were ramping up. The investors wanted due diligence materials. And the thing about due diligence is, it gets real quiet right before it gets real loud. That silence, that delay in signing, that sudden request for one more doc, it's the tell. And Carter, in all his kombucha-soaked confidence, thought he could coast through it with enough buzzwords and next-gen compliance visualizations. But none of that could hide the fact that the only person in the building who knew what control mapping even meant had just been reassigned to fonts. So I gave them fonts. I reformatted the entire vendor risk report in Comic Sans and waited for someone to notice. No one did, and that told me everything I needed to know. It came in a nondescript envelope, no ceremony, no gold seal, just a crisp piece of cardstock tucked behind a letter from the Office of Federal Certifications, declaring that Emma S. Halden was now a licensed auditor under the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, SOC2 specialization, effective immediately. I stood in my kitchen holding that envelope like it was radioactive. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just slid the letter back in, sealed it inside a fireproof folder, and placed it under the sink behind a box of expired dishwasher pods. That's where I kept the important stuff. Things I couldn't afford to let anyone see, not because I was hiding, but because I was waiting. Timing matters, especially when you're about to walk into a minefield. Carter didn't know. No one did, and that was the point. By Friday, we were deep in pitch season, which meant a full calendar of pre-briefs with every VC from here to Palo Alto. Trent had moved into our office full-time, occupying the fishbowl conference room like it was a second-stage cocoon where buzzwords were birthed. He brought in whiteboards, candles, a Bluetooth speaker that only played ambient house music, like we were trying to manifest a funding round via vibration. At the investor pre-brief with Avex Capital, I was asked to sit in silently for support. No chair was offered, so I stood in the back, near the glass, like a potted plant someone forgot to water. Carter was wearing a new sport coat, and that slicked back hair he thought made him look like a young visionary, but really made him look like a guy who overcharged for car washes. Trent opened with fluff. Carter followed with flash. And when the senior partner from Avex finally asked about system-level risk mitigation, Carter gave the kind of answer that made my teeth itch. "Oh, we've got protocols," he said. The hand waved like he was batting away a fly. Full-stack controls, streamlined audit trails, were locked in. There was a pause. The investor narrowed her eyes, and who manages that internally? Carter flashed his patented grin. "We've got a lean risk team, no red tape, operationally agile. We monitor weekly. Nothing gets past us." My nails dug into my palm. That was a lie. Several, actually. We hadn't done a real risk posture assessment in 4 months. Weekly monitoring was scrapped in favor of automated dashboards Trent installed, which, by the way, hadn't been vetted by anyone from security. The so-called risk team was now 3 junior analysts reporting to Blake, whose idea of due diligence was checking Google Calendar for double bookings. The binder in my bag felt heavier, because I had started one. Not company-mandated, not part of my document formatting duties. Just mine. It was black leather. Zippered, discreet. Inside were screenshots of altered diagrams, side-by-side comparisons of approved VS pitched controls, metadata logs showing who edited what and when. Every page was sourced, dated, and annotated. I even included a copy of my new license, nestled in a plastic sleeve right behind a note titled, "Exhibit a Misrepresentation of Security Controls, Section 4.3b. That note wasn't for me. It was for whoever would need to read it. After the Avex meeting, Carter did his usual victory lap, fist-bumping Trent in the hallway like they'd just closed Series C. "That's how we do it," he said, walking past me like I was a ficus. I gave him a smile so small it could have been mistaken for a twitch. Then I walked to my desk, opened the investor pitch PDF, and added a comment in my local copy. Slide 14 diagram falsified. No system-level mapping verified. Potential violation of compliance representation standards. Flag high, saved, encrypted, archived. Some people think control is loud, slamming doors, shouting matches, walking out. But real control, it's quiet. It's knowing that the moment someone pulls the wrong thread, the whole thing unravels. And I had just started stitching the edges. It showed up on my desk like a corpse in a comedy, dressed up, smiling, and very, very dead on the inside. The flow chart, 4 pages long, color-coded. Branded with our new logo, an abstract hexagon Trent claimed symbolized data harmony. What it actually symbolized was bullshit. At first glance, it looked legitimate, workflow boxes, arrows, compliance lingo peppered in just enough to look real. But if you had even a passing relationship with how our systems actually worked, it was obvious this diagram had been built by someone who thought multi-factor authentication meant asking twice. Worst part? My name was still listed at the bottom. Approved by Emma S. Halden, Compliance Operations Lead, like a forged signature on a fake check. I stared at it for a solid minute. Then I stood up, walked over to the supply closet, and pulled a red sticky tab from the back of a drawer, the kind I used for legal exhibits. Came back to my desk, peeled the backing off, placed it neatly in the corner of the float chart, and wrote in sharp black pen, "See Appendix A." Then I signed my initials in the lower right margin, exactly as instructed. It wasn't agreement, it was a breadcrumb. You see, Appendix A didn't exist, not yet, but it would. Because when the time came, and I had no doubt it would, Appendix A was going to explain, in excruciating detail, why the contents of that flowchart were materially false. It would show what data had been omitted, what controls were misrepresented, and how it all got sanitized to look VC-friendly. And my initials wouldn't be consent, they'd be evidence. That's what people like Carter never understand. Paper trails don't always lead where you want them to. By the time I looked up, my intern Josh was standing there holding a binder against his chest like it was a shield. Kid was smart, new, eager, nervous as a chihuahua in a thunderstorm. He glanced down at the float chart and then at me. "Are we in trouble?" I didn't look up from my screen. "We will be." He blinked. "Like legal trouble?" I finally met his eyes and offered the calmest smile I could manage. "Just make sure your inbox is clean, and don't reply to anything Blake forwards without checking the original source." Josh nodded and backed away like he'd just touched a live wire. Smart kid. I turned back to my screen and opened the project archive. Made a new folder. Pitch materials submitted/altered. Dragged in the float chart. Scanned the original Carter-approved deck and marked every diagram that had been replaced since my last clean version. Then I clicked Request Print Copy from the internal admin portal. Selected 2 full-color copies of the most recent investor pitch deck. When the print manager popped up with a form asking for reason for record, I typed Internal Archival and Legal Version Control, ref, possible misrepresentation pending review. I figured I'd be the only one reading that message. But if I wasn't, even better. By the end of the day, the decks arrived in an unmarked envelope. I didn't trust our central mailroom, so I walked down myself and pulled them off the tray before anyone else could get curious. The binder at home was getting heavier. Each tab, each page, each annotated margin. It was a quiet little indictment growing fatter by the hour. And with every lie they put on paper, I let them bury themselves one layer deeper. I didn't shout, I didn't warn. I didn't plead for a seat at the table. I just kept the receipts and let the printer do the talking. The chairs were arranged in a perfect arc, like some corporate Stonehenge meant to summon Series C capital with buzzwords and espresso. Everyone had a nameplate, everyone but me. I was seated in the far corner of the room, half hidden behind a monstrosity of a potted plant someone had wheeled in to make the space feel organic. The only thing organic about it was the mold creeping up from its overwatered roots. No one looked at me, that was fine. Carter strutted in 5 minutes late, sleeves rolled, blazer slung over his shoulder like he'd just stepped off the cover of Forbes, Nepotism edition. He dropped into his chair, clasped his hands together like a youth pastor about to sell salvation, and said, "Let's talk about certainty." It was pitch meeting number 5. Today's audience, Lorwyn partners, big, sharp, and quiet. The kind of people who never raised their voice, never asked the obvious question first. They'd let you spin your story, smiling, nodding, until one of them slid a single line across the table that gutted your whole narrative like a fish. Carter didn't notice. He was in flow. Tavernix, he declared, is building something that transcends mere software. We're building trust at scale, predictive resilience, and above all, compliance you can bank on. He clicked to slide 14. The fake flowchart filled the screen in glorious, expensively printed color. Our audit trail, Carter said, tapping the screen with a capped Sharpie, is bulletproof. End-to-end visibility. Every system tied to a protocol, every protocol tied to an owner. No gaps, no ghosts. We don't just pass audits, we preempt them. I didn't blink. The Lorwyn team remained stone-faced. One of them, a woman in a slate-gray blazer with a yellow legal pad, leaned forward slightly. "Can we get verification from your compliance lead?" The silence that followed was thick enough to chew. Carter laughed. "Oh, Emma?" He gestured vaguely over his shoulder in my direction, not bothering to turn. "She just handles the paperwork." My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I just stared at the back of his smug little head and let the words settle. "She just handles the paperwork." I opened my leather folder, not with drama, no slam, no fanfare. Just a quiet zip, like unsealing a document that had been waiting patiently for its moment. Inside were neatly labeled tabs. Slide 14 diagram misrepresentation, signature logs alteration timeline, SOC2 control matrix submitted vs actual, Appendix A auditor notes, and behind it all, nestled like a hidden blade, my license. I didn't take anything out, not yet. I just let the folder rest on the edge of the table, closed but present, like a sleeping animal that could wake up if poked. From across the room, I saw one of the Lorwyn partners glance at it. He raised an eyebrow, then looked back at Carter. Carter, oblivious, kept going. "We've aligned all our control layers under a single dashboard. Fully auditable, real-time alerts. Our last 3 quarterly reports, clean. No anomalies," which was funny because I had copies of all 3. And I knew for a fact that Q2 had a flagged anomaly that was manually suppressed from the report. Internal stillness. That's the only way I can describe it. like the eye of a storm where everything is calm, not because it's over, but because it's about to start. From the hallway, I heard someone knock. A Lorwyn assistant stepped in, whispered something to the lead investor. He nodded. Let's take a short break, the lead said. 5 minutes. Then we'll continue with risk alignment. Everyone stood. Carter clapped his hands like a coach at halftime. I stayed seated, just me and the folder. When they filed back into the room, the energy had shifted. Subtle but real, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. The Lorwyn lead investor had taken off his blazer and rolled his sleeves. His expression wasn't angry. It was something worse, curious. Carter didn't notice. He bounced back to his chair like he'd just sealed the deal in the hallway, gave a half laugh, tossed a casual "all right, where were we?" and tapped his laptop like the pitch had never paused. He was back on script, but the Lorwyn associate in the gray blazer was no longer taking notes. She was watching him like a hawk watching a mouse pretend to be a lion. So, she said, and resting quietly on her pad, you're stating on record that Tevernix is SOC2 compliant as of this quarter? Carter beamed. Absolutely. Every box checked. Every control verified. We run a tight ship. A pause. Then she tilted her head slightly. Can that be independently verified by your internal compliance officer? Carter didn't even flinch, of course. Emma's got it all documented. He turned, finally looking at me for the first time all meeting, right as I opened my folder. I didn't rush. I didn't smile. I just lifted the cover and pulled out a neatly bound packet, rubber-banded and labeled in black marker. Exhibit A misrepresentation of security controls, SEC. 4.3b. Carter blinked. Wait, what is that? I met his gaze without blinking. Would you like to verify the claim? He went quiet. Then, slowly, warily, the Lauren associate reached across the table and took the packet. Flipped the band off. Opened to the first page. Page 1, side-by-side screenshots of the original flowchart versus Carter's modified version, color-coded, timestamp metadata intact. Page 2, Slack logs showing internal objections from the compliance team, highlighted, dated, unresolved. Page 3, an email chain where Carter had replied LOL make it sexier in response to a flagged security concern. Page 4, audit logs showing redacted entries. Page 5, a scanned signature of Carter's initials approving the altered flowchart with the comment, investors don't care about this stuff, just need a clean visual. And behind all of it, clear as crystal, my official federal auditor's license. Sealed in a protective sleeve. Unmistakable. Carter stood up, hands raised like he could stop a freight train with posture alone. Okay, Emma, what are you doing? I turned toward him, voice calm, measured, surgical. What I'm required to do by law when I witness a material misrepresentation of compliance status during a regulated investment discussion. The room stilled. The Lorwyn lead leaned forward. You're a licensed federal auditor? I nodded. As of 3 weeks ago. Certification complete, active status. Another silence, this one longer. He tapped a finger against the table, then turned to his associate. Get legal on the line. Carter looked around, still waiting for someone to laugh. No one did. She didn't even tell anyone, he barked. She's not even what is this? I closed the folder and folded my hands in my lap. This, I said, is what happens when you confuse silence for consent. The Lorwyn team didn't say anything more. But one of them, mid-30s, sharp suit, dead eyes, opened his laptop and began typing furiously. Another whispered to a colleague and stepped out to make a call. Carter sat down, slowly, pale, and I stayed exactly where I was, in the eye of the storm. The pages made that soft, sharp sound as they turned, like a razor slicing through fabric. No one spoke, not even Carter, who now sat hunched slightly, elbows on the table, fingers twitching like a man trying to reload a lie he dropped somewhere between bulletproof audit trail and LOL make it sexier. The lead investor held the packet like it might bite. He flipped through slowly, eyes narrowing with each page. When he hit the page with the redacted access logs, proof of falsified compliance reporting, he closed the binder and rested it flat against the glass tabletop. Then came the sentence, not loud, not dramatic, just flat, almost bored, but nuclear in meaning. This isn't a pitch anymore. This is an incident. Carter's eyes darted to me. His mouth opened, closed, then finally stumbled into noise. You blindsided me, he spat, half sitting, half standing like he hadn't decided which version of himself to be yet. Emma, you blindsided me. I tilted my head the way you do when someone accuses the mailbox of committing mail fraud. No, I said, my voice low and even. I warned you. You didn't. I leaned forward slightly. I logged every objection. I timestamped every diagram change. I sent 3 emails marked high importance, raising concerns about the material accuracy of your pitch deck. You archived 1, deleted 2, and told Blake I was being old school. He opened his mouth again. I cut him off before the next syllable could fall out. You didn't think I mattered. The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was clinical. It was the kind of quiet you get in courtrooms and server rooms during power loss. Across the table, the Lorwyn associate who'd been typing stood up and said, You need a break, 10 minutes, everyone out. Don't touch your devices. The lead nodded, already pulling out his phone. I'm calling legal. The third investor, previously silent, the one with the kind of face you forget unless it's telling you you're fired, stood and dialed a number so quickly it was clear this wasn't his first rodeo. Hey, he said into the phone, loop in counsel. Tevernix's compliance is in question. No, not later. Now. Carter stared at them, pale and sweating like someone just turned the lights on in his favorite fantasy. His mouth worked soundlessly for a moment. This is an ambush, he mumbled. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I quietly gathered the loose materials from the table, my license, the packet, my folder, and placed them back in my bag with care. No drama, no flourish, just methodical containment. Like finishing a puzzle you already knew the answer to. As the investors filtered out, the last one, an older man with tired eyes and a Rolex older than me, paused at the door and glanced back at Carter. Then at me. You're staying, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Carter opened his mouth to protest, but the man was already gone. Just like the deal, and all that remained was me. Sitting at the head of a table Carter had built out of lies. The door clicked shut behind Carter with a sound so small you'd miss it, unless you knew what silence really sounded like. He stood just beyond the frosted glass, jaw clenched, arms folded, trying to look composed. But I could see the pulse in his neck thumping like a warning light. Inside, it was quiet. No rustling, no throat clearing. Just the room adjusting around a new gravitational center. The lead investor, Mr. Harrow, I finally remembered, folded his hands in front of him, elbows resting on the table like a judge about to hand down a sentence. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. What he looked was focused. The way surgeons look when they realize the tumor is bigger than expected. Miss Halden, he said, as a licensed federal auditor, are you submitting this packet as part of an official report? The room held its breath. I looked him in the eye. Yes, I said. As of this moment, it is entered into the record. The audit begins today. No dramatics, no pause for effect. Just a fact dropped into the middle of the pitch meeting like a depth charge. One of the associates started typing. Another made a note in the margin of his legal pad. Harrow simply nodded, then leaned back in his chair and exhaled once slowly. Not like he was stressed, like he was shifting gears. Understood, he said. We'll notify the Funds Oversight Committee. Until further notice, all investment activity with Tevernix is suspended. No gasps, just confirmation. Another associate stood. I'll coordinate with our regulatory counsel. We'll need to document chain of custody for these materials. He gestured to my folder. I slid it across the table, already labeled, already organized, already ready. Harrow looked at me again. You will receive official follow-up from our compliance division within 48 hours. In the meantime, we'd like you to remain involved in any ongoing correspondence. With your credentials, we consider you the only currently verified point of trust within Tevernix. The words hit like a quiet gavel, point of trust. Outside the glass, Carter was pacing now. His mouth was moving. I couldn't hear him, but I knew that expression, rapid-fire denial, scattered blame, probably something about sabotage, maybe even a wild claim that I was just bitter over losing influence. I'd heard it all before. None of it mattered now. Because through the glass, he could also see what was happening. 3 investors gathered around me, shaking my hand. No applause, no dramatic music swell. Just truth, acknowledged, documented, binding. By the time security showed up, subtle in suits, not the clumsy kind, Carter had stopped pacing. He just stood there, frozen, watching as Harrow handed me a business card and said, "You'll be hearing from the board." He didn't mean my board, he meant theirs. Tevernix's emergency session was scheduled within the hour. By 4:15 p.m., the internal memo hit the employee Slack. Effective immediately, Carter Langford has been removed from his role as acting CEO pending formal review. It was followed, 10 minutes later. A second message from legal: all outgoing investor materials are paused. A third-party audit is underway. Please preserve all communications. I closed my laptop, gathered my folder, walked past the conference room where Carter now sat alone, arms folded tight, talking to no one. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to, because every lie he'd told had already been filed, timestamped, and handed over. Some people fight by yelling, others by quitting. Me, I just do the paperwork. And sometimes, paperwork brings the whole house down. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.